welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a little all over the place the last few weeks, but we finally got the half marathon finished. So as promised in the last episode, this is going to be a full recap of my training leading up to it, nutrition, as well as carb loading leading into the race day itself. And then I'm going to share with you guys the official time that I got at the end of the video as well. We did hit the goal, sub 2. So if you guys are interested in trying to hit a sub 2, or you're new to running, definitely stick around. There's some good tips in here that I wish I knew prior to getting this thing going. So stick around and we'll get into it. So starting with programming, I ended up doing an 8-week program that I put together with resources like the Daniel's running formula book, primarily for marathon running, but I pulled bits and pieces from there. Also from the CSCS, which I had studied for, which is a strength and conditioning test. So piecing those things together, I had done a month of aerobic base building, just getting my toes wet, starting to build mileage slowly, because for those of you that don't know, I did not like running whatsoever prior to going into this prep or choosing to do the half marathon. I was one of those people that said I was never going to do more than 3 miles, and now I'm at 13.1. So I slowly built it up, and I think the reason I hated it in the beginning is primarily because I didn't understand, number one, the mechanics, but also number two, that it takes running slow over time in miles to build your aerobic base, to build your speed. And I think a tendency for a lot of runners, or maybe it's just myself included, going into it with an ego and just being like, I want to be as fast as that person, so let me push the pace. And then that's where injuries arise and things like that. So really understanding, dialing in the form, and making sure you're not only running, but you're also strength training as well. That way we're not negating certain areas and leaving ourselves more susceptible to injury. Just tying all that in and letting go of the ego, so that way we are slowly building those miles, because that is truly the only way to get faster, get stronger, and build that aerobic base and be able to do 13.1 and beyond that, right? The next up from there is the marathon. The 8-week program for me consisted of 3 running days per week and then 3 lifting days per week. And that's just how it broke down for me. I know there's a lot of influencers or athletes out there that are able to train twice a day. And a lot of people are able to run in the morning and then go lift at night. But for me, being a father, being a firefighter, and having so many different roles, as well as being a coach and an online coach, stretched too thin to be able to allocate 2 hours a day on most days to be able to do that. So I had to break it up, so 1 hour a day, to open my schedule a bit. Now, there are times that I did do 2-a-days, and that ended up freeing time later on in the week because I knocked out, a 2-for-1. So I ended up doing it that way. And it was 1 easy run, generally around 5 to 6 miles. And then obviously that started a little less when I was in my initial aerobic building phase, but once we got into the 8-week phase, that did develop into more of a steady 5-6 mile average. Now, the second day generally was a tempo or interval style day. Occasionally I sprinkled in some hill style workouts, which are good, hitting different variations, strengthening the legs on the eccentric portion of that too as well. So that was something I added in only 2 or 3 times throughout the entirety of the 8-week program. The hills were just not made for speed. Obviously tempos and intervals are your primary sources of building that speed base and testing race paces and things like that. So Georgia, like in the last episode, was one, and that was very steep. So that was the last leading up to it, and I honestly think that definitely played a part in helping build that base and the strength of my legs to be able to accomplish what I needed to. And then the final running day of the week was the long run. So easy runs, long runs, all slow, conversational, steady paces. Later on in the program, once we hit closer to race time, I started to incorporate more of a not quite race pace, but more of trying to push that tempo a little bit. I think I was averaging like 9:30 in my long runs and my easy runs towards the end. In the beginning, it was very, if I can have a conversation and I'm sitting at, a zone 2 heart rate, that I'm in a comfortable space. The slow, easy, long runs, conversational paces, those are where the engine is built. So that's not exactly the most exciting or the fun stuff. I personally enjoy it because I pop in a podcast or listen to music and it's my hour away or 45 minutes away where I'm running, and that's it. You just soak it all up and you kind of just sit in that solitude for a bit, and it's freeing. So just slowing things down is a huge tip for whoever is newly starting to run, making sure you are doing your easy run days, and you have to include obviously the longer run because that is where you're building the mileage and you're conditioning the legs to be able to withstand that longer duration on your feet and the impact that it is going to cause to the knees, the ankles, the hips, the back, things like that. And then obviously tempos and intervals, you're throwing those in there because that is where we start to push your paces faster and faster to approach that race pace that you're shooting for. And in my case, my race pace that I was shooting for was around 8:40 to 8:45, which would have put me sub 2 hours. I think closer to 1:57, give or take. So that's where I was shooting. And as we got closer to the end of the program, I had more designed intervals and tempo days that were pushing the race pace and beyond that to really, get into not only the aerobic, but into that threshold space where, I spent majority of my run or majority of the race. So along with those 3 days, the easy run, the tempo, and the long run, I also incorporated strength training because I think a lot of people that are solely running and not mixing in the strength are missing points and have imbalances, and not strengthening these key ligaments or muscles leads to, I haven't had any injuries, knock on wood, a couple aches and pains here and there. I mean, as the miles get built on, soreness and things like that associated to it. But as far as injuries go, I haven't felt anything like that yet. And I think that is a larger part to adding in the strength training sessions. So for me, it just worked out to be, I was strength training 3 days a week. And in those 3 days a week, I was doing full body sessions. So I was doing, a pull, a push, a hinge, a press, and mixing in some sort of an aerobic or anaerobic modality to finish that out. So some sort of a circuit to finish the session. Started with more of a hypertrophy base where I was pushing higher repetitions, more between the 6 and 10 to 12 rep range, and moderate weight, so 60%, 70%. And then it transitioned towards the back end to more of a strength and power focus, because really wanting to get those box jumps, the plyos, those explosive movements and that strength across to really get my legs in that foundation set prior to running. This is different for every trainer out there, but generally speaking, all of my clients that I see 1-2 times a week, generally in person, are going to get full body sessions because you want to stimulate the muscles twice a week, and that is going to be the most bang for your buck. Stimulating them once a week, it's more of a maintenance, at least twice a week, then we begin the growth process from there. As you're going through this process, especially for me, once I got into the back end, mixing in the power and the strength, obviously I'm increasing weights and pushing the intensities as well as increasing my mileage. It's important that when you're doing so, if you're not doing so with a coach or someone trained in that way, to be listening to your body, because we do not want to push past the point that our bodies can handle and then we're resulting in injury one way or another. We want to make sure we're properly recovering from sessions, giving ourselves downtime between heavy sessions and long runs and things like that, not going back to back all the time. And we're also allocating at least one rest day per week. I know people hear rest days all the time, I'm myself included, and you don't want to rest. You want to be doing something. And rest doesn't mean you have to sit on your ass and not do anything and move all day. You should still be walking, getting your steps in, and stretching, yoga, whatever suits you. But your body needs time to recover and heal. And sleep is a huge part of that. It's something that I could do a lot better with. But having a kid, being a firefighter, obviously it comes with the territory and stuff you got to work around. So trying to get those 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep a night is ideal and allows the time for the body to recover, your digestive system to fully process prior to the next day and the next training session. So training and programming was really just one part of the equation. We talk about nutrition and fueling for performance. That is, your foundational piece when it comes to your training and your programming, but also leading up to race day, making sure that we are getting in the correct amounts of carbs, although you need your proteins and your fats, especially when you're doing a hybrid style of training where you're lifting as well as running. Your body needs the protein to recover from the strength sessions and allow the muscles to rebuild. And you also need the fats for your organs, your brain, your heart to function properly, as well as your joints and everything else. So you still need your fats and your proteins, but carbs are going to be the primary source of energy when it comes to aerobic endurance. So longer duration sports like running and things like that, swimming, biking, whatever the case is. The first thing that your body's going to target is the glycolytic system. So using, the carbs in your body as the primary fuel source. And then from there, you plug and play with percentages to hit your proteins, your carbs, and your fats. I generally eat about 1 gram per pound of body weight in protein. And then for the fats, it sits around 20 to 30% of the total calorie intake, as well as carbs kind of filling in the rest of that. Again, prioritizing the nutrition is huge when it comes to this, and making sure that you're timing the fueling properly as well is definitely key to going into, a race or just training for it. A couple things that I used in particular was BPN's G1M Sport, which is, carb electrolyte mix. It's a liquid carb, and that's something that I incorporated prior to my runs. That way I was topping off my glycogen stores prior to going into the run, as well as I would take an additional electrolyte scoop, which I also had from BPN prior to the run as well. And that would go for any of my training runs. I would always stack some BPN and then get the G1M and the electrolytes in prior to. And I always found that once I started incorporating those 2 key supplements, from there, I felt like I had more energy to go longer without that slump. And if you haven't been there, once you start pushing the pace and start pushing mileage, you will feel the tank start to run empty, right? The body is an engine. You got to put fuel in the engine, and in this case, carbs are the fuel. So that is definitely one key thing that I started using for my long runs, anything 10 miles or over, or we're gonna take me an hour and a half plus. I did start supplementing with BPN's Go Gels. The Go Gel packet that I had was the apple one, which was awesome. It tastes like applesauce, and it was by far better than any of the other ones that I've tried, which were super syrupy, like super thick, and just did not taste great. Fueling is key, and you guys have to make sure that shit is dialed in once you start getting into the training, because it's just as important, if not more important, than anything else. I did carb load for 48 hours prior to the event. Now, it's generally recommended 72 to 48 hours. If you want to, you can do 24 hours. Science does show that 24 hours is good enough, but I decided to do 42, somewhere in the middle of that, and I thought that was good for me. Now, carb loading just means I'm taking my calories that I've been eating through the entire prep. I'm taking my macros, dropping my proteins and my fats significantly, and then bumping my carb intake to about 70-80%. So I ended up eating around 600 grams of carbs per day, which for me, my primary source of carbohydrate intake in that point was rice. So I was able to get there pretty quickly. And then mixing in juices, orange juice, apple juice, things like that to get those liquid carbs in, also mixing in the G1M. And I also have just a carb supplement that I had from First Form prior to leaving that sponsorship. And I still mix that in to hit the days that I just couldn't get there when I was on shift or whatever, and I needed quick carbs to get that into the system. And honestly, fruits, juices, rice, sourdough bread, things like that are all great sources of carbs that are going to help you get to that point. And it does sometimes feel like you're eating all day. But trust me, carb loading, topping off those glycogen stores, it is worth it. So we got up the race started at 6. I ended up getting up at like 3:45 to take an hour for myself. Started my normal routine, went into the kitchen, killed my Yeti of water, had some electrolytes, also a beets supplement that we ended up getting from Garden of Life, who was sponsoring the race. So that was nice to have, because beets supposed to help your cardiorespiratory system when it comes to athletic performance. So there's studies out there that show that, you know, it helps increase your end of race abilities when it comes to that. So when after the Yeti, the electrolytes, I had my coffee, my Nespresso, because you have to have coffee. You gotta flush the system, right? The goal is to poop and get it all out, because the last thing you want to do is be pushing through a race with either a full bladder or having big shit. So that was the main goal there. When that stuff was done, I housed 5 ounces of sourdough bread with honey as my glycogen source for that, because 2 hours prior to the race, per the literature, you're supposed to eat about 1 gram per kilogram. In my case was 81 kilograms of carbs prior to, but stay away from the proteins and the fats, because that's going to slow the digestive process up, just have you staying fuller, and that's not what you want. You want to clear it out, and you want that source of fuel to be ready. So we had our breakfast. From there, I got the family ready, because we did bring Callie and Megan, and we headed out. We were running later than I wanted to be. I was hoping to be there a little earlier, and traffic was just absolutely mad when we got down there. So I ended up jumping out of the car, Megan parked, and then I went straight over to meet up with some of the friends that I was running with that day. And the jitters were starting to kick in, and I was just in that zoned out space that I was just focused on the task at hand, similar to how I get when I'm on shift at the fire station. But the overall experience was awesome. The day prior, I went and picked up the bib and got everything, and the day of, they had a DJ, and the energy was pumping, and that was something I was not expecting when it came to doing a race or racing in a marathon. So it was cool to see. And again, shortly after I got there, I thought I needed to pee, and then I looked at the line, and the idea of peeing went out the window. So I jumped in, we lined up, and then it started absolutely pouring sideways. So it was a little chillier in South Florida that morning too. I think it was in the low 60s on top of sideways blowing rain. So it was a chilly start, but they were playing music. We were all tucked in close to each other, kind of jumping, and it is what it is. But it kind of made for a cool experience going into it. And although we had wet shoes starting, the rain stopped very shortly after we started the run. So once we said go, or they said go, we took off. I actually started my Garmin too early, so do not do that until you've crossed the finish line, start line, because that is where the chips in the bib are actually going to turn on and start tracking, because that was a little bit of a difference on my watch. And then my actual race time when I got the results was because I started my watch too early. But regardless, wait until you cross the start line and then start the watch. So when the race got started, I actually felt pretty good. So I was holding my 8:40 to 8:45 pace for the first 4 miles. After 4 miles in, sun started to come up a little bit. I had taken my initial Go Gel, so I had 3 of them with me, and I took my first one 30 minutes in, so I was around 3 or 4 miles in at that point. And I took it, I was feeling good, so I ended up pushing the pace to closer to 8:30, sometimes even dipping into that 8:20 range, and was in and out of that from mile 4 to mile 9. When I got to mile 9, which a lot of people talk about bonking and things like that when it comes to races, and then it always being around the last 3 or so miles to finish out the race, it was just like clockwork. As soon as mile 9 hit, that pace I was still averaging around 8:30 at that point, taking my second Go Gel an hour in, and mile 9 comes around, we're at our finish line, and I started cramping in my quad. So I was changing running forms up, trying to shake that out. I was grabbing Gatorades from stands along the way to try to, put those down to compensate for the sodium loss and cramp that I was experiencing because my tank was running out and I was not prepared for it. And something that I didn't acknowledge early on when I was holding that 8:30 pace prior to mile 9, it was probably starting around mile 6, is my heart rate, instead of being in a nice threshold, lower end threshold for me around 165 to 170, I was 180 at that point, which was way too high. So I was running a little extra, and that being the first warning sign that I was probably getting dehydrated and didn't have enough electrolytes in my system. So I should have probably had an extra scoop of electrolytes prior to leaving in the morning. I had 2 scoops of G1M and 1 scoop of the electrolytes, but maybe 1 more scoop to top it off would have brought me to a little over 2,000 milligrams. But I think overall I was just exerting too much and pushed my pace too quick, and that's a rookie mistake. So the goal next time around will be to shoot for a more of a negative split, where I'm starting slower like I should have been doing at that 8:45 pace, and then back half of the half or the full that I decide to do, I start to, pick that pace up even more. And hopefully by that point, I do have fuel left in the tank because I haven't churned through it all. My heart rate's still at a good zone, and finish out the race stronger. This race was not finished in the capacity that I wanted it to be. After cramping up in the quad, I started to feel it in my left oblique and then in my right hamstring, and it got to a point where it was like a super mental game, and I wanted to quit. I was like, I'm gonna cramp up all over if I keep pushing. I don't know how I'm gonna continue pushing through this one. I ended up dropping my pace to about 10 minutes per mile for I don't even know how long, hopefully not more than like half a mile. I had to slow it down, get my heart rate down, and try to shake out these cramps as much as I could. At that point, the crew that I was running with ended up coming behind me, and one of them had a salt tablet. So they tossed me the salt tablet, and I think even still to this point, that helped at least. It didn't take away the cramps whatsoever by any means, but it did help pull them back a little bit. I just feel like at some point in the race, in any race or any competition, you're in a mental point where it's like it's you versus you. You got to keep pushing through it, and I did. So we ended up getting there. So I officially crossed the finish line with a 1:54.57 time. So basically a 1:55, which is what I shot out for with the original starting pace at 8:40. So I was very stoked, regardless of the ugly finish or not, which I'll drop somewhere in these B-roll shots. But we passed. It was an awesome experience. I had a great time. I walked across that finish line, or after I crossed the finish line, I couldn't bend over. I felt like my whole body was going to cramp up, and that was pretty wild to experience. So there will be tweaks and adjustments with the element of electrolytes and hydration into next race, but all in all, it was great. Once I loosened up, got the medal, took the pictures, got to really absorb it, and I got to absorb most of the race. And it was a good time and a good starting point, and I'm stoked to keep running through them. So it was fun. I think I did as well as I could with an 8-week prep and a 4-week prior to that base period. So a little bit more electrolytes next time. I think my eating was on point, so I don't really think that was the issue. Maybe instead of 30 minutes a piece from the Go Gels, going down to 20 minutes a piece or 25 minutes a piece, just dialing in that a little bit more, staying on top of the nutrition, and really focusing on my easy runs being priority. That is a wrap for this episode, and I hope you guys, whether you're just starting out in running and interested in a half marathon or going for that sub 2-hour pace, we're able to pick up some tips and tricks and some rights and wrongs from some of the stuff that I talked about in this episode. And if you did, please keep tuning in, drop a comment. I want to hear your comments. I want to hear your feedback. If you liked it or you didn't like it, all comments are good. It helps me learn and continue to grow this channel. Next competition is officially set for April of next year, 2025. We are doing High Rocks. May or may not sprinkle in a marathon in February, but that's a really quick turnaround with not a lot of preps. But High Rocks men's doubles is going to be in April of 2025, and we're gonna film that out and rock and roll come January 1st, and me and my partner are gonna shoot for 1 hour, 60 minutes or so. 59 minutes is like ideal. So we'll see what we got. Thank you guys for watching and keep tuning in. Remember, keep pushing for your goals, continue to grow. We are striving for progress at the end of the day, not perfection. That is where growth happens, and we just want to keep thriving. So I'll see you guys soon.